Hi, my name is Rute and I'm a medical doctor. Welcome to Life as Dr. Rute. Today we're talking about periods, the menstrual cycle. I'm a firm believer in understanding how your body works, understanding what to expect from your body, what to expect from your periods, because if you know that, it can make it easy for you to recognize if something's not quite right, and so you book an appointment to see a healthcare provider. What is it about periods that we're going to talk about today? So I've split it into 3 parts. So the first part, we're going to look at the structures, or some of the structures that are involved when it comes to our periods. The second part, we're going to look at the numbers. How long should a period last? How do I calculate my cycle length? Things like that. And the last part, we're going to look at when do you ovulate, and specifically, what are the hormones that are involved when it comes to your periods and the menstrual cycle? What is this progesterone and estrogen? What's going on? Now, this video is intended for educational purposes to promote health. It's not intended to provide any specific health advice or to substitute the role of your healthcare provider. Let's get straight into it. So the first part, the structures. So a woman is born with 2 ovaries, one on the left and one on the right. And inside these ovaries are little structures called the follicles. And inside these little follicles are the eggs. So a woman is born with so many eggs, all the eggs that she will ever need in her lifetime. Then, next to these ovaries are the tubes, the fallopian tubes. They're open on one end and open on another end. So an egg will be released from the ovary. It will go through the fallopian tube, open on that end, and down, hoping at some point in the fallopian tube to be fertilized by a sperm, and then it will go down into the uterus, the womb. So the womb has a lining. So that lining builds up through the cycle, hoping for a pregnancy to sit in the lining of the womb. But if there isn't a pregnancy, then that lining of the womb will shed, and that's the blood that you see. So that will go through a structure called the cervix. So the cervix has a little tiny hole in the middle called the cervical os. So that will allow blood to flow from your womb through the cervix into the vagina and out. Or it also allows the sperm to go up, hoping to fertilize an egg. So the next part after the cervix is the vagina. So that's the vagina canal, that's the vagina. Okay, so now we've looked at what's inside, so let's have a look at what's outside. So starting with where the vagina is, so you have the vagina like that. Underneath you, there'll be another structure, so that's the anus. So let's go back to the vagina. So on either side of the vagina will be the labia minora. Some people do call it the inner labias. And then outside will be the labia majora, and some people call that the outer labias. Okay, so let's go back to the vagina opening again. So on top of that is a little tiny hole called the urethra opening. That's where your urine comes out. And then on top of that is the clitoris. All right, so that's just some of the structures. So let's get straight into the numbers. So the first thing when it comes to the numbers, if we understand this principle that the first day that you have a bleed is the first day of your period. So from the first day of this period to the first day of your next period, so if you look at how many days it took to get there, then that will give you an idea of how long, what the length of that cycle was. And if you do that over a number of months, then that will give you an idea of the length of your cycle. Every woman is different. The average is about 28 days. So from the first day of the first period to the first day of the next period, how many days did it take to get to that? So the average is about 28 days. But that ranges. So it's normal for women to have shorter cycles up to 21 days. So some people can have cycles every 25 days, every 22 days, every 21 days. And on the other end of the spectrum, up to every 35 days. And the only way you can figure that out is by checking how often it's taking you to get to the next period over a certain number of months, and then you get an idea of how long it takes to get to your next cycle. And that should be regular. It's not uncommon for your periods to be a few days early or a few days late. So how long should I bleed for? So the average is about 3 to 5 days, but the range can be from 2 to 8 days. So the next part, when do you ovulate? If everybody has different cycles, how are you supposed to know when you ovulate? So studies and literature show that most women will ovulate 14 days before their next period. So that's another reason why it's really important for you to know the length of your cycle. So if most people ovulate 14 days before their next period, so if your cycle is, let's say, the average 28 days, that means you can estimate that you might ovulate 14 days after your period. And that's if you're having regular cycles. Okay, so if you have shorter cycles, for example, let's say your cycle is every 21 days, if you're going to ovulate 14 days before your next period, then it will be 7 days after your period. Okay, so that's looking at ovulation in women who have regular cycles. And so the last part, we're going to look at the hormones that are involved. What's going up when, what's going down when, why do we call it the menstrual cycle? So the 4 main hormones I'm going to talk about today are LH, luteinizing hormone, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, progesterone, and estrogen. Okay, so we're going to start with the first day of your period. So the first day that you have a bleed. So on the first day that you're having a bleed, the brain recognizes that, oh, there hasn't been a pregnancy, so we need to try again. So the brain will release 2 hormones, the FSH and the LH. So what happens is the FSH stimulates the follicles inside your ovaries. So remember before we talked about how in the ovaries are these little follicles, and inside these little follicles are the eggs. So the follicular stimulating hormone stimulates a number of these follicles. And as these follicles are being stimulated, they start to release the hormone estrogen. So now estrogen starts to build the lining of the womb. Because remember, you were having a period and that lining of the womb has shed, so we now need to rebuild it again. So estrogen starts doing the job again. So back to the FSH. So it stimulated a number of these follicles, but only one of them is chosen. Only one of them becomes the follicle that now can release an egg. And the thing that tells the follicle to release an egg, or helps that follicle to release the egg, is the LH. So then the LH will go up. When the LH goes up, it causes one of those follicles to release an egg. That egg is then released into the fallopian tube and it goes down, hoping at some point to be fertilized by a sperm. So now that we've got that egg that's been released, we're left with the follicle that released the egg. That now becomes a structure called the corpus luteum, a cyst-like structure. And just to mention, when some women try and check to see if they're ovulating, so when the hormone that they're checking in the urine is that LH, when it goes up, it then, it gives them an idea of, oh, if it's gone up, that means I'm ovulating around this time, because that LH is what causes the egg to be released from the follicle. Okay, so back to the follicle. So that follicle that released an egg becomes the corpus luteum. Now that corpus luteum starts to produce the last hormone that we haven't spoken about, the progesterone, and a little bit of the estrogen as well. So it starts to produce the progesterone, and the progesterone helps to maintain the lining of the uterus, of the womb, in case there is a pregnancy, in case that egg gets fertilized. So we've talked about all the hormones. So now what happens at the end? So what happens is determined by whether that egg got fertilized and is starting to grow or not. So if that egg got fertilized and it's starting to grow into a pregnancy, it will produce a hormone called beta-HCG. Now this is the hormone that we check to check if a woman is pregnant, and it will be released into the urine and we can check it. And that hormone also helps to send signals to say to that corpus luteum, oh, there's a pregnancy here, please continue producing the progesterone. And because the progesterone needs to maintain the lining of the womb until something else takes over. So if there isn't a pregnancy, then there isn't anything to send signals to the corpus luteum telling it to continue producing the progesterone and the estrogen. And so the levels of the progesterone and the estrogen drop. Now that drop does two things. One, it causes the lining of the womb to shed, so you have a period. And two, that drop is recognized by the brain. The brain now is like, oh, so there wasn't a pregnancy, we need to produce the LH and the FSH again, and then the cycle starts from the beginning again. I hope that made sense. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time when we talk about some of the period signs not to ignore. And don't forget to subscribe.